I know one of you out there is kind of disappointed, and I understand, but don't worry. We took your idea into consideration, and we are going to do war games here on Pop very soon. Don't know exactly how soon very soon is, but we will be doing a versus with war games somewhere down the line, so need not worry. It didn't go on deaf ears whatsoever. No, we're going to go to war in a different way this way. And we're going to have a nice little battle, and we're going to see what happens when Kubrick battles Stone. It's going to be Full Metal Jacket facing off against Platoon. AJ, take it away.
So, we're going. Obviously, it was going to be a thing. We were eventually going to do war movies, and as far as war movies go, my favorite, I guess, genre has always been for war movies is the Vietnam era. That seems to be where the best movies came from. So, in my opinion, anyway. So, I think we're going to start with Platoon. This was basically Oliver Stone's first-hand thing. He wrote and directed it, and it's a totally original screenplay where he basically... It's not necessarily something he witnessed in particular when he was during Vietnam, but it was, I guess, just the war in general, and he found a story in it that he created. That's seen through the eyes of Chris Taylor, who is Charlie Sheen, pretty crazy. And he basically is a college dropout who decided he wanted to volunteer for the Army, and immediately regretted it the first day he was there, the first week anyway, because his narration is told through letters he's writing to his grandma about how much he hates it there. And his, interestingly enough, his narration has been compared to his dad's narration in Apocalypse Now. It's very eerily similar. But basically, it's not so much, to me anyway, it's not so much the story of Chris Taylor and what he has to go through so much as it is the story of Sergeant Barnes and Elias, who are Tom Berenger and Willem Dafoe, who are basically two completely opposite people in this war who handle it in totally different ways. Sergeant Barnes is a murdering, scarred psychopath. Like, he has these ugly scars all on one side of his face, and he's been shot like 5 or 7 times before, and there's a myth amongst the platoon that he cannot be killed. And I guess you could say he's kind of the villain of the movie, but we'll go into that in depth in a minute. The other side of that is Elias, who is, he's basically drugged out a lot of the time, and he's basically considered like almost a Christ figure, hence his death, for instance. It was really funny to me. I think it's John C. McGinley's character that says Elias thinks he's Jesus fucking Christ, which is really funny to me because it was only 2 years later that Willem Dafoe played Christ in The Last Temptation of Christ. Which was also an Oscar-nominated movie. And basically what it is this these two more or less battling for the untainted soul of Chris. Because he's just been dropped into this war. It's his first week, and he's still got his innocence, per se. It's just a matter of, is he going to go the murdering psychopath route, like Barnes, or is he going to manage to keep his head on, like Elias? And one of these two is going to conquer him, basically. And also, they basically the platoon is more or less run by them. Their superior is this lieutenant, but this lieutenant is basically walked all over by Barnes and basically Barnes' minions, Red and Bunny, who are John C. McGinley and Kevin Dillon. The lieutenant might as well not even be there. Like, there's even a scene towards the beginning where Sergeant Barnes gives some orders, and the lieutenant takes him off to the side where nobody can hear and says, do you think maybe from now on, maybe you can give the orders, but maybe I can say them? So the platoon kind of, respects me. Which basically, Barnes does not care. Barnes does not care about anything except death and destruction, basically. So, basically, that's basically why I see the movie. It's basically the struggle between Barnes and Elias for both the platoon and Taylor. Now, as far as the interesting thing about this movie is you could say there's a villain, whether it be Barnes or just the war itself. Like, you could say the war created Barnes, more or less. But the movie doesn't really have a hero. Because even though he's our main focus and he's pretty much the only center of innocence, the, like, innocent center we have here, Chris Taylor's in no way a hero at all. Even at the end, when he's the one that dispatches Barnes, he's still in no way a hero. So I guess you could say, like, there's one particular scene where the movie really lets us know that it's not taking sides. It's basically, the war is the main antagonist of this movie, because we see people in the platoon that are friends, you know, with the main characters, and they die, and it's horrific and sad and all other kinds of emotions. But then we get to this Vietnamese village where they basically raid it, and a whole bunch of carnage breaks out. There's a particular scene where Barnes, there's a mother and a father and a whole bunch of their kids, and Barnes shoots the mother point blank in the head in front of the children and the father. And that's when you realize that the movie's not really saying it's America versus Vietnam, it's this is a war, and on both sides there's dying and tragedy and people suffering and just all of that. And there's also one scene, this village scene is long, and it brings a lot of points to the story. There's an early scene, this is kind of where Chris starts to kind of go more towards the barn side, where there's a scene towards the beginning where it's him and Junior and the other guy, and they're all supposed to be on guard while everybody else is asleep. But Chris is the only one that's awake now, and there's Vietnamese soldiers coming towards them. And they get closer. At first, you can't really tell if maybe they're just, you know, a different platoon or whatever, because you just see, like, blackness from the shadows, and then as they step into the light, you see that they're Vietnamese soldiers, and they're getting really close. But nevertheless, Chris cannot move. He is completely frozen up, and there's an ambush that results in deaths. And Chris gets blamed for it, even though he was the only one awake. But nevertheless, even though he was the only one awake, he just didn't do anything. He just completely froze, because this is the first time he's ever been in a situation like that. Well, he's trying to make up for that in this village, because they come across a guy in one of the, whatever those are, their domiciles. And he only has one leg. And he's standing up, and he seems to be laughing at Chris, in a way. So Chris loses his mind and starts screaming at him, and then starts shooting at him and doing the Western dance thing, where he's basically having to hop on his one leg to avoid Chris's bullets. And then he shoves him and threatens to kill him and all that, but he's still not quite on that side, though, because he can't bring himself to kill him. But that's when Kevin Dillon steps in and doesn't do the easy thing and shoot the guy. He takes the butt of his gun and beats his head in, graphically. And we don't really see it, but we see the blood splatter onto Chris's face. And Kevin Dillon's, like, all amped up, saying, like, "Did you see the way that head split open? I've never even seen brains like that before." That's when he realizes just how dark things are really getting. And with when he shoots the woman, is the first time we really, really see the dark side of Barnes, too. The problem I kind of have with this movie is, even though it's called Platoon, and it's basically about the platoon and the horror that they go through, we don't even get to know about half of them. And the ones that are there, there's a whole array of names that people recognize, like Johnny Depp is in there, Forrest Whitaker, Richard Edson, Tony Todd. All these people are in there, but they're more or less there to kind of serve one scene, and then we don't really hear about them again until they're dead. And there'll be people, like, death scenes will be made a big deal out of, but it'll be people we don't even, like, remember. So that's kind of the... I mean, I know it would have taken a lot of time to get to know all of them, because there's a whole thing of them, but even so, I think it would have helped to give them more than one scene each, even if, you know, you would have had to... It would have seemed a little compacted, probably. The movie's a really swift 2 hours. I'm surprised it's not a little longer. But, you do have the soldiers that we do get to know. There's, like the villainous trio, along with Barnes, you have John C. McGinley and Kevin Dillon. They have a lot of scenes, and we basically get to build how not right in the head their characters might be. Keith David basically plays the world-weary one that's, like, wise and tells Chris, you know, what's right and what isn't, basically. It's also worth noting that Oliver Stone has a cameo towards the end, but, like, 20 seconds after he's introduced, he blows up. But yeah, the main focus is the main three with Barnes, Elias, and Taylor. And it's always interesting when we focus on Elias because he's such the opposite of the environment that he's in. He's the one that basically predicts what happens. There's a particular scene where they're laying in the dark, and Elias is the one just kind of looking at the sky and pondering and saying, there's no doubt in my mind we're going to lose this war. So... and of course, this movie has some iconic scenes in it, worth noting. Starting, of course, with probably the most famous scene, one of the most famous scenes in movie history. For a reason, I guess it's a power thing. It's never really determined. It's either a power thing or Barnes is just fucking crazy, which could also be. That's pretty much what we're led to believe about him. That's his character arc. Barnes is fucking crazy, and he only gets crazier. At one point in the middle of the jungle, right before there's about to be an ambush, Barnes just shoots Elias and leaves him for dead. And then they're walking through the jungle, and Barnes just nonchalantly tells Taylor, well, let's get going, Elias is dead. Which, of course, is a big deal, but, you know, he wants to get out of there as soon as possible. Well, they get up in the helicopter and they're getting ready to leave, and as they're leaving, it turns out Elias is still alive. And he's being chased through the jungle with this whole, small army of Vietnamese soldiers running behind him and shooting at him. And then we finally get this scene, where he eventually finally is shot too many times and just falls over dead as they're all leaving him behind. And that's when Taylor and basically the rest of the platoon figure out that, it's a really bad idea to have Barnes on their side. But there's really nothing they can do about it. That's when the theory arises that Barnes can't be killed, when they go through the whole mythology of him. And of course he overhears this and has it's Behringer's big Oscar moment, I guess. But then finally we have the end scene where there's a big battle that ensues. And there's this really... I guess, eerie shot where Barnes decides he's going to kill Taylor now. So he picks up this shovel, and we get this shot, and just as he is about to kill Taylor with this shovel, and we see, like, red in his eyes, there's an explosion that blows them away from each other. So Barnes is practically taken out. And it's a really well-done scene the way it's shot. I'm really glad Stone did it this way. Obviously, Chris is more or less the innocent one that hasn't killed anybody yet. So Barnes is laying here and he's all burned up from the explosion. And Chris is also looking very John McClane at the end of Die Hard right now. With the black from the explosion. And he walks over with his gun and Barnes is laying there calling for a medic. And he's still just barking orders, just saying, you know, hey, go get me. He's like half covered in blood, half covered in black from the explosion. It's just like, hey, you go get me a medic. And then Chris points the gun at him. And the shot doesn't move. The shot stays on Barnes. And Barnes doesn't think he will, so he just says, go ahead and do it. And before we have even time to cut back to Charlie Sheen, he's already shot Barnes and killed him. It all happens in one shot without cutting away. And then there's the other iconic shot of this movie, one of the very last shots. Taylor's finally getting out and going to the hospital. Where, like they say, he's gonna, you know, get 3 meals a day and, like, a shower. And everything's great in a military hospital because you're out of the jungle, and even if you're wounded, it's much better than being there. And as they're taking off in the helicopter, there's this massive hole in the ground, and it's they're throwing the bodies in it. And Chris looks down over the helicopter, and we get this really great helicopter shot of the mass grave. And it's the other really iconic shot in the movie after this one. So that's pretty much what Platoon is. It's basically what it is it took a different approach from the other war movies where, as I said before, there's no sides taken or anything, and it's not so much about like the war itself and the politics, but just what happens to this platoon when they're in the jungle, and the fact that it's also happening on the other side. So, and this story of his narration ends with wherever the afterlife is, somewhere Barnes and Elias are still fighting for his soul in death, even. So, needless to say, this movie was known for how profound it is, and being on the highest possible tier for war movies. Obviously, it won the Oscar for Best Picture, as well as Stone winning director. It also won for editing and sound. It won 4. Both Tom Berenger and Willem Dafoe were nominated in supporting actor, and the screenplay and the cinematography were nominated. I'm really surprised the cinematography lost. I would think that's one thing they would have awarded, but it went to The Mission instead, which is okay, but I think the cinematography in Platoon trumps it, I think. So, yeah, winning the Best Picture Oscar is a worthy addition to that list. As well as, the list in general of war movies. And for some people, any movie, any genre. So that's why Platoon has stood the test of time and will continue to probably for a very, very long-ass time. Full Metal Jacket's a little different. Actually, Full Metal Jacket's probably very different. I'll go ahead and say first off about Full Metal Jacket that, like I said, not to condescend or jump to any conclusions, but I'm pretty sure a lot of Full Metal Jacket's fans, particularly on the internet, don't know that the movie has a second half.
Yeah.
This movie is absolutely infamous for its entire first 45 minutes. The boot camp segment of Full Metal Jacket is something hundreds of thousands upon thousands of people can quote word for word. From I'm gonna write Sergeant Harmon, your senior drill instructor, to Joker screaming no before Leonard killed himself. People know that part by heart. I guess we'll talk about that first. One of the things that made Full Metal Jacket what it is the flawless performance by R. Lee Ermey, who apparently did this before he became an actor. So it basically came to him naturally. And so much so that, to my understanding, I don't know this like for a fact, but to my understanding, exactly, the whole segment of his dialogue and walking around and doing the whole opening scene, that's like, I think it's like 9 minutes long, is all improvisation. So I heard at one point a rumor that when he says obviously he's known for how creative he gets with his insults. And the one where he says, you look like the kind of guy that would fuck a person in the ass and not even have the goddamn common courtesy to give them a reach around. Apparently Kubrick stopped filming and had to ask R. Lee Ermey what a reach around was. I don't know if that's just a myth or what, but that's the story. And the great moment with him wanting to see Joker's war face. Pretty much everything in that first 10 minutes is probably a quote that everybody has heard at one point or another. Like, I'll bet you could suck a golf ball through a garden hose, and I didn't know they stacked shit that high. It's just an endless array of quotes that you will be hearing forever. And what I really love about the opening, actually, is the what they do with the character of Leonard is how we get to see him as basically just this pile of shit. One of my, I don't even know why, one of my favorite lines, because it's so simple, is just when he says, "You are a disgusting fat body." And it's like he's not even trying. And basically the whole first 45 minutes is us watching this character. You have all the other characters that are going to be important later, like Joker and Cowboy and all them, but the main focus of the first half is really Leonard. And we basically watch how, basically what he's supposed to do, basically the way Hartman talks to them is basically supposed to break them down so they can start anew and become killing machines. But for Leonard, it doesn't work the same way it does with the others. It turns him into a different person in a different way. So, and you could probably theorize to death what Leonard's life was like before he joined the Marines, which may have had a lot to do with it. I've always thought that since it's when Hartman says, "Didn't Mom and Daddy give you enough attention when you were a child?" is what gets him shot. I don't know, but or if he was just driven crazy by this, we'll never know. But I kind of normally you would criticize that, but I kind of like that there's the mystery to Leonard like that. We don't know if he was already like this, or if he started off fine and it was just so bad he was driven to that. So I've always been really, really intrigued by that. And of course, iconic scenes galore. I don't know if iconic is the right word, but extremely popular scenes galore, like the jelly donut and the soap and the towels. This is my rifle, this is my gun, everything. Everything in the first half of this movie has made a name for itself. And the whole, and it's such a tragedy because Leonard seems to really be getting somewhere as this first half reaches its end. Because Joker has basically taken him under his wing because he was ordered to. But he's able to complete the obstacle course, at least. And he finally realizes, of course, they finally find something he's good at, which is firing a rifle. And it seems like everything's fine, but at the same time, as the scenes progress, Leonard gets to do the Kubrick stare that came from the opening shot of A Clockwork Orange, or when Nicholson's looking out the window in The Shining while Wendy and Danny are outside. The scene where it's about as subtle as a hammer to the head, but the scene where they're chanting "kill, kill, kill" while the camera is zooming in on Leonard's face. It's basically his wheels turning in all the wrong directions. And then, of course, the infamous scene in the bathroom. Kubrick always has at least one scene where we're in an entirely white room and something horrible goes down. This is the scene for that. The famous scene where he kills Hartman and then takes his own life, and then we fade out. Basically taking the movie into its second chapter, when we go right into Vietnam. And now we're following Joker, who is in journalism like he wanted to be, which Hartman gave him shit for. Because everybody else is trained to be a killing machine, and then he's going into journalism. But anyway, after a series of events, he manages to find his way back to... he teams up with Rafterman, who's a guy we've just met, that he met in Vietnam. And he ends up in this place where he reunites with Cowboy. And they team up again. And we spend so much time in that opening scene. When he reunites with Cowboy, when we first see Arliss Howard again for that first time, it's also like we as an audience are connecting with an old friend also. And I always love the fact that they kept the names that Hartman gave them, like Joker and Cowboy. And the trouble is when we get there, they meet Animal Mother, who is Adam Baldwin. And this character is a fucking psychopath. He's not as much to the extreme as Barnes is, but Animal Mother's fucking crazy. And it's the most relevance that Adam Baldwin has had, I think. Especially given the fact that he's not related to the other Baldwins, despite popular belief. He's the one that, like, hangs out with the corpses of dead Vietnamese soldiers and basically bullies Vietnamese prostitutes into pleasuring him and all that. Basically, everybody is an instrument in this war somehow, even if they're not in the war itself. I will say, and it's worth noting that this is actually, sorry Family Guy, but this is the movie. This movie is the reason I know Surf and Bird. Everything else is just, oh, that song from Full Metal Jacket. Luckily, I saw Full Metal Jacket before I saw Pink Flamingos. But we won't go into that. A complaint some people had about Full Metal Jacket, particularly when it first came out, was that it's too episodic. As long as they are intriguing enough, it never bothers me if a movie is episodic. It doesn't have to be one big story, as long as it's telling something that's worth telling. In which case, it's just the story of these people in this war, so it's just the random stuff that happens. Like we go through the journalists that are filming them and making the documentaries, the Surf and Bird thing. The scene where they're doing the interviews, and the scene like with the all the bodies in the hole and they're all standing around them, and the that score that comes back at the end after they've killed the sniper, where it's this, I think Ruins is the name of the piece, and it just sounds like grinding gears in the wrong way or something. And it's got this really eerie feel to it. And then of course the whole story with the sniper brings us to the finish. Yeah, I don't mind the whole episodic nature of it, because that's just what it is. How do you really make a story? With Platoon, obviously they just made somebody in their crew the villain, but and the whole, okay, yeah, you could say Platoon has a much deeper story because you have the whole battling for Chris's soul thing, but Full Metal Jacket is just the story of this group, and basically, and the movie has no ending either, obviously. They stop the sniper, and they march into the night singing the Mickey Mouse theme. And we don't know what's going to become of them from there. That's all we need to know. And the whole movie is just masterfully made like that. I guess it's worth noting, I wanted to give you at least a little bit of suspense of which one I was going to choose. If you know me personally, you know that Full Metal Jacket is in my top 5 of all time. Full Metal Jacket, I believe, is one of the greatest movies ever made. And not just in that way of, like... Okay, like I said, I don't mean to demean these people anyway, but I just want to talk about the people that you probably know that... They're probably younger, too. The people that love Full Metal Jacket because they love to quote R. Lee Ermey's lines. I don't know if those people realize how much of a masterpiece the whole movie is. Because the huge main criticism you almost always hear is the Vietnam parts are not as good as the boot camp parts. And the interesting thing about that is... I like the way it does it with, the great thing that makes the boot camp scene so great is the fact that boot camp is just training, Vietnam is what you've been training for this whole time, is where all the death and destruction is. But the way the movie plays it, after boot camp, going to Vietnam almost seems like the easy part. And it's almost like a relief when you're actually there. Because believe it or not, apart from, like, the deaths of, like, 8-Ball and Cowboy and all of them, more bad things happen to them in boot camp than actually in Vietnam. Things were actually going fine for them in Vietnam before he and Rafterman went off. So, yeah, personally, I just think Full Metal Jacket's a completely flawless movie. So... And I always have. It was one of my... Both of these were like... I have a soft spot for Platoon because Platoon was the first war movie I ever saw. Because back in the day, I was squeamish, so war movies I kind of stayed away from. Platoon was the first war movie I ever saw, and I saw Full Metal Jacket like maybe a week later. Because Platoon is the one that made me say, wow, I want to see more war movies if they're like that. But when I saw Full Metal Jacket, it just had this instant. I felt like I had seen a totally flawless movie from beginning to end. I love the Vietnam stuff just as much as I love the boot camp stuff. I know most people, and I can see that too. I can understand where people think maybe they blew their load after making the boot camp scene so great, but I think it keeps it up the whole time. I'm just constantly fascinated by this movie. Every time I watch this movie, it's all the way through. So, yeah, both movies obviously stand in their own right, and I know overall Platoon is the more beloved one by most people, by, but, and I know the unfortunate thing about the kind of teen fan base that's developed around Sergeant Hartman's character, kind of somewhat gives Full Metal Jacket kind of a tainted reputation, because it's like when we had the great pleasure of seeing this in a theater last month, and the whole time I was saying, we're going to be in there with rowdy teenagers, I bet. But I don't see, it's not that kind of movie at all. I understand how it got that following like that, but I hate that it has that reputation now, because when you say, I kind of almost hesitate to tell people that Full Metal Jacket is one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time, because that's something you'd hear a college kid say because they like Sergeant Hartman's lines. But the whole thing is a masterpiece to me. And I think it's not, obviously, I think it's the best war movie ever made. I think it's one of the greatest movies ever made. That could be the Kubrick fanboy in me, too. But, yeah, obviously, I totally understand why Platoon would be the more beloved one, and is the more, sure, Platoon is definitely deeper, but just, I really like Platoon, and I really have a major respect for Platoon, but I just think Full Metal Jacket's a masterpiece, so. And completely, like when I said we don't really get to know the guys in Platoon, half of them, and that kind of makes the death scenes not as harrowing as they could be. I can't find a flaw in Full Metal Jacket, personally. So.
Another verses in the books, and next week, question mark. So join us next Sunday for your next verses. AJ, any parting words?
That's it.